Buckle up, America, because we're about to take a wild ride on the Trump economic roller coaster. And spoiler alert, this ride doesn't have a happy ending. In just 3 short weeks, the stock market took a nosedive, shedding a mind-boggling $5 trillion. That's trillion with a T, folks. Remember those Make America Great Again hats? Well, they forgot to mention the part about making America's savings accounts dramatically smaller. This wasn't just a blip on the radar, it was a full-blown economic earthquake. And unfortunately, it was a tremor we all felt. Let's talk about the national debt, shall we? It's a topic that often gets swept under the rug, but it's crucial to understand its impact on our lives and future generations. The national debt is essentially the amount of money that the government owes to creditors, both domestic and international. It's like a giant credit card bill that the country has to pay off, and just like any other debt, it comes with interest. The more we owe, the more we have to pay in interest, which can take away from other important areas like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. It's like that credit card bill you try to ignore, but it just keeps getting bigger. Imagine the stress of seeing that bill grow month after month, knowing that you have to pay it off, eventually. Now, multiply that stress by 1,000,000 and you might get a sense of what the national debt feels like. It's a burden that affects not just the government, but every single citizen. Under Trump's watch, the national debt skyrocketed by a whopping $7.8 trillion in just 4 years. This was due to a combination of tax cuts, increased military spending, and emergency measures to combat the economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. While some of these measures were necessary, the rapid increase in debt has long-term consequences that we can't ignore. That's more than any president in recent history. The national debt has been growing for decades, but the rate at which it increased during Trump's presidency was unprecedented. This isn't just a political issue. It's a financial one that affects the stability and future of our economy. Remember all those promises about eliminating the debt? Politicians often make grand promises during their campaigns, but the reality of governing is much more complicated. Balancing the budget and reducing the national debt requires difficult choices and sacrifices, something that is often easier said than done. Yeah, those didn't quite pan out. Instead of seeing the debt decrease, we saw it balloon to unprecedented levels. This has left many people feeling disillusioned and frustrated, wondering if we'll ever be able to get our financial house in order. Instead, we're left holding the bag, or rather, the very, very large bill. This debt isn't just a number on a balance sheet, it's a real financial obligation that will have to be paid off by future generations. The more we borrow now, the more we'll have to pay back later, and that can limit our ability to invest in other important areas. And guess who's going to be stuck paying it off? That's right, us, and our kids. The burden of the national debt will fall on the shoulders of future generations, who will have to deal with the consequences of our financial decisions. This isn't just about numbers, it's about the kind of future we want to leave for our children and grandchildren, and probably their kids too. The national debt is a complex issue with no easy solutions, but it's one that we can't afford to ignore. It's time for us to have an honest conversation about our financial priorities, and make the tough choices necessary to secure a stable and prosperous future for all. The infamous 2017 tax cuts. Remember those? They were touted as a revolutionary step to rejuvenate the American economy. Politicians and economists alike promised that these cuts would lead to unprecedented growth, job creation, and prosperity for all. The idea was simple. Reduce the tax burden on corporations and the wealthy, and the benefits would trickle down to everyone else. It was a grand vision, but did it pan out as expected? They were sold as a way to boost the economy and put more money in the pockets of everyday Americans. The average family was supposed to see an increase in their disposable income, leading to more spending, more demand, and ultimately, more jobs. It sounded like a win-win situation, but as we all know, reality often diverges from theory. But here's the thing about trickle-down economics. It's like waiting for a leaky faucet to fill your bathtub. The idea is that wealth will eventually seep down to the lower levels of the economy. But in practice, it often feels like an endless wait. The water drips ever so slowly, and by the time it reaches the bottom, it's barely a trickle. This analogy perfectly encapsulates the frustration many felt when the promised benefits of the tax cuts failed to materialize for the average American. The reality is that 83% of the benefits went straight to the top 1%. Surprise, surprise. While the wealthy enjoyed their windfall, buying luxury cars, celebrating in their mansions, and watching their stock portfolios soar, the rest of the country was left wondering where their share of the prosperity went. The disparity between the rich and the poor only grew wider, and the middle class found themselves squeezed even tighter. The corporate tax rate was slashed from 35% to 21%, but did those savings get passed down to workers in the form of higher wages? Nope. Instead of investing in their employees, many corporations chose to hoard their newfound wealth or use it for other purposes that did little to benefit the average worker. The promise of higher wages and better job opportunities remained unfulfilled. They went right back to shareholders through stock buybacks. Companies used their tax savings to repurchase their own shares, driving up stock prices and enriching shareholders. This practice did nothing to stimulate the broader economy or improve the financial well-being of ordinary Americans. It was a classic case of the rich getting richer while everyone else was left to fend for themselves. It's like giving a kid in a candy store your credit card and expecting them to buy you a Snickers. The kid is going to buy what they want, not what you need. Similarly, corporations and the wealthy use their tax cuts to further their own interests, rather than investing in the broader economy. The result was a lopsided distribution of wealth that left many Americans feeling disillusioned and betrayed. The grand promises of the 2017 tax cuts turned out to be little more than a mirage, leaving us to ponder the true cost of trickle-down economics. Remember when Trump declared a trade war on, well, everyone? He slapped tariffs on goods from China, Mexico, Canada, and the European Union, like a toddler throwing a tantrum in the grocery store aisle. He claimed it was to protect American jobs and businesses, but the reality was far less rosy. The trade war backfired spectacularly. Manufacturing jobs, the very ones he promised to protect, actually declined. Farmers, the backbone of America, lost billions as their exports to China dried up. And consumers? We got stuck paying higher prices for everything from washing machines to beer. Let's talk about Trump's business record, shall we? Because if you thought his economic policies were chaotic, just wait till you hear about his entrepreneurial endeavors. Trump Airlines, bankrupt, Trump Steaks, grilled to a crisp, Trump University, more like Trump Scamversity. The man has a knack for turning gold into, well, not gold. So why anyone thought he could turn the US economy into a well-oiled machine is beyond me. It's like hiring a chef who's famous for burning water to cater your wedding. Remember when Trump promised that wages would be going up, not down? Well, he must have forgotten to mention that time stood still for many Americans. While the stock market was busy doing its best impression of a roller coaster, wages for most workers remained stubbornly stagnant. It's like working extra shifts but getting the same paycheck. Sure, the CEO might be swimming in bonus money, but the folks on the factory floor are still struggling to make ends meet. So much for that whole prosperity for all thing. Trump loved to brag about the economy on Twitter, touting record-high stock market numbers. He often used these figures as a measure of his success, pointing to the surging stock market as evidence of his effective leadership. To his followers, these tweets were proof that the country was on the right track, economically thriving under his administration. Like a kid showing off a good report card. But those numbers only told part of the story. The stock market's performance, while impressive, was not a comprehensive indicator of the nation's overall economic health. It was a snapshot, a moment in time that didn't account for the underlying issues that many Americans were facing daily. They didn't reflect the growing inequality, the trade war casualties, or the struggles of small businesses that were closing their doors. The disparity between the wealthy and the poor was widening, and the middle class was feeling the squeeze. The trade wars, initiated with the promise of bringing jobs back to America, often resulted in higher costs for consumers and retaliatory tariffs that hurt American exporters. Or, the mounting national debt. The national debt was ballooning to unprecedented levels, raising concerns about the long-term economic stability of the country. Families were struggling to make ends meet, with many living paycheck to paycheck, worried about their financial future. It's like judging a book by its cover, where the exterior looks promising, but the content inside tells a different story. The surface-level indicators were misleading, masking the deeper, more troubling realities that were affecting millions of Americans, or a president by his tweets. Once you delve deeper, Beyond the 280-character messages, you start to see the complexities and the challenges that are not addressed in those brief statements. The tweets were often simplistic, lacking the nuance needed to understand the full scope of the issues at hand. You realize that the reality is far less glamorous. The shiny facade of a booming stock market hid the cracks in the foundation of the economy. People were losing jobs, businesses were failing, and the promised economic resurgence was not reaching everyone. The Trump economy was like a shiny sports car with a faulty engine. It looked good on the surface, with its polished exterior and sleek design, but underneath, there were serious mechanical issues that needed attention. It looked good on the surface, attracting admiration and envy. People saw the gleaming exterior and assumed everything was running smoothly, but it was only a matter of time before it broke down. The underlying issues, if not addressed, would eventually lead to a breakdown, leaving those who were dazzled by the surface-level success to face the harsh reality of an economy in distress. Trump's America First approach might have sounded good in a campaign rally, but in the interconnected world of global economics, it was like trying to play a solo in an orchestra. His trade wars and tariffs alienated allies and disrupted global supply chains, creating uncertainty and instability in the process. The result? A global economic slowdown that impacted everyone, including the United States. It's like throwing a rock in a pond and being surprised when the ripples reach your own feet. The Trump economic roller coaster may be over, but its effects will be felt for years to come. The soaring national debt, the widening wealth gap, and the damaged global trade relationships are all part of his lasting legacy. It's a legacy that will require careful navigation and responsible leadership to address. Whether we can learn from the mistakes of the past and chart a more sustainable economic course remains to be seen. But one thing's for sure, we're all along for the ride.